Welcome to section 6 and handling side effects. In this first part, we'll talk about installation and setup, and we'll also be talking about side effects as such. So the content of this part is about us discussing what a side effect is. We'll also talk about how to set up and configure the effects library that NGRX provides. And lastly, we'll talk about how to set up our first effect. In our part after this part, we'll talk about how to do a more advanced effect so you can really see the benefits of using this library. Let's talk about side effects versus no side effect. So first off, a side effect is something that interrupts our code flow. So let's have a look at what it's not. So first off, we have a service like we would usually have in Angular. We have a method called getData, and we got some synchronous code. So how do we know it's synchronous? Well, everything that happens to the code is right in here. We have a set of products, we have a set of categories, and we have some kind of mapping function that merges the two datasets. There are no surprises here. You can readily see what happens. Let's have a look at something with a side effect. So here we have a method that instead of getting the products defined as static data, it's being fetched from somewhere. Now that somewhere could be a backend, or it could just be a promise that we define inside of the code. The point is, we don't really know what goes on when this function fires or this function fires. We do know after a while, unclear how long, could be a millisecond, could be 10 seconds, we get some data back and we're able to operate on it. Point here is with side effect is that there is a level of uncertainty of what goes on when we leave the function. So that's why we really call it a side effect. It's something that happens on the side. It needs to go somewhere else to get our data. And that's not just a function returning, but rather a web call or calling a network resource. So that much about the concept as such. Okay, so we are inside of VS Code. We have a scaffolded Angular application, and we have also installed two different dependencies, namely NGRX store and NGRX effect, which is the new library that we haven't seen before in any of the previous NGRX projects. So what we're going to do here is to configure two things. We're going to configure the store module. We're used to doing that. We have a property and we have a reducer that goes with it. But here we also have something called the effects module. So the effects module takes an array, and that array consists of a comma-separated list of different services. Let's have a look at this service and see what it actually does so we get a feel for it. All right, so we're getting inside of the effect service, and the first thing we see that it is decorated by injectable, which means we are able to inject it wherever we need it. We can also see that it has a field called increment dollar that is itself decorated with the decorator effect. For now, it takes object that has a property set, and this is dispatch false. So dispatch false means simply that the end result of running this should be nothing, because the default answer to running an effect is usually that you end up doing a dispatch. Let's take a step back and let's explain more thoroughly what we mean. So the reason for writing an effect in the first place is that someone or something is doing a dispatch inside of our application, and if that happens, we have the ability to listen to this and perform a side effect. Okay, so now we have the flow ready for us. Let's see that in code. So here we have the actions dollar that we always need. So the actions dollar does a pipe, and it listens to something being dispatched by using the operator overtype. So overtype takes an argument that is a string argument, and this is simply the action being dispatched. So if someone tries to dispatch increment or decrement or add product, we are able to listen to it. So once we listen to it, we have the ability to carry out the side effect, which in this case is our tap operator that just logs to the console. Okay, so now we understand what the effect service is. It's simply a listener to when a action is being dispatched. Armed with all that knowledge, we go back to the app module and we do a quick recap. So we set up the store module, so we have something to dispatch. We set up after that the effects module with an effect service that has the ability to listen to something being dispatched. So with this knowledge, we're going to show this in the browser and we're going to debug this step by step, and you're going to be able to see how this works. Okay, so we're inside of our application in the browser. We see here on the left that we have an increment button and a value being outputted. So the way we've set up this application is that we have the increment method to execute as soon as we click this increment button. And as we can see, the store does a dispatch of type increment when we click the button. So from what I've told you before, the effect service has the ability to listen to something being dispatched. And here we, thanks to of type, we are actively listening to something of type increment. And when an increment happens, we are able to carry out a side effect, namely this tap operator that simply logs to the console. So let's hit this increment button in the UI and see how things carry on. So here we press increment. We see that the increment method is being invoked. The store is about to do a dispatch of type increment, and we're going to move here and just carry on executing. And we see that our side effect or our effect service here have the ability to pick this up because it's listening to increment, and it's carrying out the side effect by logging to the console. And we're just going to let this one go like so. And we'll check the console, and we see that the console is logging out what we are writing in the effect service. So now we kind of understand the machinery and the flow of things. Okay, so we have come to the summary of this part. Let's go through what we've talked about. And yes, so we talked about side effects, what it was. So we showed that in ordinary code and how it differs from a normal data flow. We also scaffolded an Angular application, and we set up the effects library by calling the effects module, and we created a tiny effect. And this effect consisted of a class in Angular that was marked with so one of the fields in this class was marked with the effects decorator. And we also wrote some code, and we showed the whole data flow from dispatching to listening to the dispatch to carrying out the side effects. So now we kind of understand and we have seen the entire flow.